So, guten Abend, liebe Gäste, Freunde, Afrika-Bewegte. Good evening, everybody. My name is Georg Lenk. I'm member of the Kreisky Board of Directors, but I'm also, since a number of years, responsible for Africa events here in the Kreisky Forum. And I will be very brief now. There will be enough other people to talk. For me, this is a very particular evening. I remember that in the Kreisky Forum, we have started the Africa series in the year 2008. But this is for the first time that we see here an important turnout of European Africans, people, personalities, Sudanese citizens who represent a very solid civil society, and the civil society element in the country Sudan, a precondition and a basis for real democracy. I would like to welcome you in particular. Of course, I also welcome all the other Sudanese guests that are here in Austria, but for all those who have traveled to come here, this is a special event and a special occasion. I would like to add to this that this evening is possible because of the cooperation that we have for a long time with the Vienna Institute, the VIDC. And I can only express the hope that the Kreisky Forum will have many other chances to accompany you on this very difficult path on which you are engaged. I wish you a good evening, and I ask now the Francis and Ishraga to come out here.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Schönen guten Abend, good evening, everyone. On behalf of Mandi for Peace, Culture, and Diversity Management, I welcome you at this very essential conference. And thank you all for being here today. We have come together to talk about very critical issue, the forgotten war in Sudan, which has caused a lot of pain and suffering for us and our people. And it is affecting not just Sudan, but other parts of the world as well. In December 2018, we had a great revolution, a fight for freedom, peace, and justice. But in October 2021, a military coup occurred led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and General Mohamed Hamdan Daglo Hemeti. Both are responsible for the war that has killed thousands, led to mass of rapes, and forced thousands to flee their homes. All of this happening while the world remains silent, as if our people not exist. But there are some lights of hope, such as organizations like the Vienna Institute for International Dialogue and Cooperation and the Bruno Kreisky Forum. They help us to feel that we are not alone in facing this harsh reality. Thank you. Without this solidarity and support, we would not be here today. Thank you for highlighting the real disaster occurring in Sudan and for co-organizing this conference. I would like to mention that the Vienna Institute always supports the diaspora, highlights their role in helping their home countries. The Sudanese diaspora is such example. We have organized many activities for Sudan and the women of the Horn of Africa. Thank you again. I want to bring to light the role of the Sudanese diaspora around the world in the revolution and now in the fight against war. they are fighting for peace and calling to stop the violence, our contributions are visible and effective as we organize campaign to end the war and build peace in Sudan. One example is our workshop planned for the next 2 days. This is not our first workshop. It follows the first advocacy workshop organized by the Bana Group for Peace and Development last year in Germany, coordinated by May Ali, who will lead the first workshop tomorrow. As a successful result, we established a Sudanese platform for civil advocacy. Our main goals are to resolve conflicts through the principle of nonviolence, provide humanitarian support for war and conflict victims, promote actions and networking, and advocate for civil, political, social, and cultural matters. This year, we have many news activists from various European countries. You are warmly welcome to Vienna. I conclude with what Mahatma Gandhi said, لا يوجد طريق للسلام فالسلام هو الطريق. There is no path to peace. Peace is the path. Let's come together to achieve our goals, and I hope you all have successful and productive conference. Thank you.
Good evening. Don't worry, I'm the third and the last one. I'm very pleased on behalf of the VIDC to welcome all of you, especially our distinguished speakers on the panel. And as Ishraga already mentioned, and I have to repeat, she is the initiator of this event. And today's event is the start of a 3-day conference called Sudan Reconstruction, referring not only to the country, but also to the society. And we have participants, researchers, activists, experts from 10 different European countries. Thank you very much for your coming. For the VIDC, diaspora-led initiatives are very important. They are engaged in emergency response now in Sudan. They support community and economic development projects. They organize public protests, like you see here on the screen. They do awareness-raising campaign that we don't forget what it's called, the so-called forgotten conflict, like Sudan is. And they're engaged, or they contribute to peace and democracy building within the diverse, fragmented Sudanese society. But their engagement is not only respected and is not hardly funded. Therefore, I call EU institutions and member state countries, special neutral ones like Austria, should involve civil society and diaspora-led initiatives, special women-led networks in their policy fields, and they should also provide some adequate funding for these activities. Please let me at the end just allow some technical remark. You find on the walls and on the window a QR code for our questionnaire. This is important for us that we improve our work. And at the end, you will see this, at the end of the event, you will see this QR code also on the screen. But now it's time for me to hand over to our moderator, Irene Horejs. She's a former EU diplomat and now, I think, senior advisor at the Bruno Kreisky Institute, and she will facilitate the panel discussion. I wish you an interesting and inspiring evening.
Thank you very much, Franz. The senior must be for age, no? Yeah, so thank you. Okay, so this, let me start. So just go on the topic. So this evening, and sorry to all the Sudanese colleagues here. So just a very short introduction. So we are talking about Sudan. So Sudan is a third largest country of Africa. and very strategically located between the Red Sea and the Sahel. So this is very important for us Europeans to remember that this is not just a country in Africa, but it's very strategically located, and also at the crossroad between Egypt and then southern Egypt, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, Eritrea, Central African Republic. So Sudan is actually a crossroad and between Arab and the Arab and the African world, and it's a very, and it has been a very important country also for I would say for humanity also in ancient times. So Sudan has come to Western minds in particular since the decade-long war of independence of South Sudan, so which ended in the independence in 2011 of South Sudan, so the splitting of Sudan. So, and by the Darfur War from 2003 onwards with the genocide in Darfur on the Masalit people. And it has come again to our minds by suddenly in 2018 by a peaceful revolution which managed to overthrow a dictator which had been there for 30 years, Al Beshir. So suddenly Sudan, after being war-torn very long time, suddenly was looked upon as a country of hope in Africa. Only 3 years later, Sudan has been again plunged into a catastrophic war, which has been generating now the worst humanitarian crisis since the famine in Ethiopia in the 80s. We have 25 million people in urgent need of humanitarian assistance, 5 million who face starvation. We have 10 million internally displaced people, 2.5 million refugees across borders, mainly in neighboring countries. So we are talking about their country and about this devastating war, which is a war mainly on people. So, and I have the pleasure here to present you a very distinguished panel which will help us to understand the background, what's the tenets, what is the role of the civil society, and what might also be the different ways forward. So I welcome here to my right, I start with the ladies first. Sorry, Doctor. Dr. Amira Osman. She's a peace activist and researcher with a focus on diaspora communities, gender, peace building, humanitarian intervention. She holds a PhD in peace studies from the University of Bradford and a double master in rural development and in gender from the University of Sussex. She's a founding member of the Gender Center for Research and Training in Sudan. And she was also a former council member of the International Peace Research Foundation. I stop here because everybody has a very long CV, so to make it a little bit shorter. So thank you very much, Amira, for being here. So Dr. Suliman Baldo is the executive director of the Sudan Transparency and Policy Tracker. He was previously director of Sudan Democracy First Group, a Sudan-focused think tank on democratization and peace. Mr. Baldo has also worked at the UN as a UN independent expert on human rights in Mali and as an advisor to the UN mediation teams in the conflict in Darfur. He was Africa Director at the International Center for Transitional Justice and Africa Director at the International Crisis Group. And before that, he had the previous career, but I stopped. So I cut that. So this is another thing. So,
thank you.
And we have also with us Osama. We have youth, so who is half Sudanese, so he's of Sudanese origin, but living in Vienna. So Osama is a social activist, he's a political activist, and he's a student of political science in the University of Vienna. So he is also part of the diaspora, very active on social media, and he will tell us afterwards about his experience. So thank you much all for being here. Yeah. So to go in, and we have still a guest which is kind of behind the screen. So we were actually Miss Annette Weber, the special representative for the Horn of Africa of the EU had to cancel her attendance because of for unforeseen meeting at the African Union that she had to attend. So she is replaced this evening on the panel by Mr. Daniel Weiss. Maybe we can see him. Hi, Daniel. Hi. By Mr. Daniel Weiss. He's a close collaborator of Annette, and he is a long-term, he has been working for the EU for almost 20 years in external relations, in humanitarian and development aid. He holds currently the function of a deputy head of division for the Horn of Africa at the European External Action Service. And from May 2020 until August 2023, he served as a deputy head of mission at the EU delegation in Khartoum. So with a lot of experience also on the ground. Thank you very much for making yourself available. Thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Irene.
Yeah. Okay, so to go into topic now. So I would ask Suliman Baldo for your keynote. Please, can you explain to us shortly historical background, the war of the two generals, and what are the roots of the war, who are the outsiders, who is involved, with which interests are they involved? So please, the floor is yours. I think
you want me there?
No, you can stay here,
yeah,
as you want, whatever you wish.
Yes, okay. This is a great opportunity. Thanks for arranging this and inviting me to address the meeting. Ambassador, you presented an overview explaining that the current war is just the latest of a series of major upheavals, major wars in Sudan that led to the separation of South Sudan, that led to the genocide in Darfur and the continuous turmoil that continues to plague, that, beleaguered region. And in fact, it is a continuation of this history in the sense that I would posit that it is not a war of two generals. It's a war of the security military establishment in Sudan against the people and their aspirations for democracy, human rights, and justice in the country. This is the main driver of this conflict. Until they went to war in April 2023, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the commander of the Sudan Armed Forces, General Hemeti, the commander of the Rapid Support Forces, were the main pillars of the Security Committee of the repressive regime of Omar Al Beshir. Together, they suppressed the popular uprising that for months in 2018 and 2019 sought to unseat Omar Al Beshir and finally succeeded in this. But the option that the generals opted for, the security and military establishment opted for, was to replace Bashir's regime with another military regime, in which the military committee, the security committee of Bashir regime, would be, the authority in the country. And of course, the military under the regime of Omar al-Bashir was fronting for Sudan Islamist movement, for the Muslim Brotherhood branch in Sudan of that regional movement, and it was a way of maintaining the same power structures by calming down the population and saying, we are removing the head of the regime, we are removing the ruling party. So it is one and the same establishment. When the youth refused and staged a sit-in, we know about the massacre in June of 2019, where the Rapid Support Forces and the army, with other security agencies, attacked peaceful protesters staging this sit-in and massacred them in a horrendous event that has yet to be investigated properly and accounted for. And it was the determination of the people of Sudan to retain the country, to a system of democracy, civilian rule, justice, and peace that finally forced the hands of this military establishment into the transitional arrangement of power sharing with civilians. And again, we see that this establishment, when they saw some energy in the civilian-led executive to implement economic reforms and institutional reforms that would change this long history of conflict and injustice in the country, the coup d'etat of 2021 occurred by the rapid support forces and by the Sudan armed forces. So no, it is not the war of the two generals. It is not the war of the two forces. It's the war of the military security establishment against the aspirations of Sudanese people for democracy, for justice, and for lasting peace. This is where the slogans of the revolution of the youth, of the civil society groups, of the political actors, of professional associations, and they remain so until today, including a key vibrant part of civil society, which is the diaspora groups. And this is why we see them protesting for an end to war and for denying the generals any legitimacy. Any legitimacy. This is the sense of this meeting, reconstruction. We are thinking positively because of all the damage the war has done, not only to the physical infrastructure, but also for the social fabric of the country. Now, the rapid support forces is a byproduct of this history of violence, therefore, and bloodshed, as a proxy for the army, as a tool for the army to suppress not only rural rebellions, but also urban uprising against this system of manipulation of the national wealth by the security military establishment. And when competition between the two forces continued immediately after the coup d'etat, is where we saw a rift occurring between the rapid support forces and the army, and therefore, a military regime cannot have two generals, basically, in the supreme command of the regime, and therefore, this is the main trigger of why they went to war against each other. A major consideration in the competition between the rapid support forces and the Sudan armed forces is the fact that both military institutions also have vast financial corporate empires, with the army controlling state-owned enterprises but running them as private companies because they are registered and incorporated under the private company law of Sudan, and keeping all the revenue from these companies into the institution of the army, while at the same time benefiting from major breaks from taxation and from all kinds of government fees and so on. For the rapid support forces, they developed a parallel system of corporate holdings as a military force, but through companies that are privately owned by the commanders of the rapid support forces. And we see that in the years leading up from 2013 to 2023, when the war broke out, the undercurrent of economic competition between the army and the rapid support forces in multiple sectors of the economy, particularly in the gold processing and production, gold trade, the livestock sector, these large abattoirs that are established by the companies of the Sudan armed forces and by the companies of the Dagalu family, the commanders of the rapid support forces, were competing for business, and increasingly this competition, economic competition, became a source of tension between the two, leading to the conflict. So that's another consideration. As I said, behind the army is an ideological push from the remnants of the Bashir regime, who are seeking to return to power by maintaining, this war between the army and the rapid support forces, to eliminate the rapid support forces, which they see as a major hindrance to the project of recovering power and returning to control in Sudan. So this is the ideological dimension. The main parties today, on the side of the rapid support, on the side of the Sudan armed forces, we find that the Sudan armed forces has not learned the lesson of the fact that a proxy militia, the rapid support forces, has turned against it, and it continues to rely until today on militias. Instead of recruiting new recruits into the army properly, they are recruiting movements of Darfur, the Justice and Equality Movement, the Sudan Liberation Movement of Minawi, Justice Equality Movement of Jibril. They are recruiting the Islamist brigades of Al-Barra ibn Malik. They are recruiting, the popular resistance is raising a lot of recruits by making an appeal, which is very much tainted with ethnic, motivation. That this is, the rapid support forces are foreigners who are trying to come and settle in Sudan. These are the diaspora of all the Arab groups of the Sahel who are seeking a new homeland, and a major conspiracy globally. This is one major propaganda argument which is appealing to the ethnic motivation against people from Western Sudan. On the side of the rapid support forces, the reliance is basically entirely almost on ethnic appeal and what they call the faza, which is the call for joining force during an episode of war and conflict. And the main motivation for the fighters of the rapid support forces is, war, booty, and looting. And that's why we have seen them systematically depleting the urban areas in Sudan, starting with the capital Khartoum, from all signs of, material signs of wealth, such as vehicles, such as the family savings in the form of gold jewelry, all signs of modern equipment, TVs or air conditioners and all of that. You find systematic destruction in the private residences of people across central Sudan in urban areas. And this is the way that the RSF is paying soldiers, because the government or the authorities in Port Sudan stopped all payments to salaries or any expenses of the rapid support forces from the beginning of the war. So that's a main motivation. And another, factor is important to take into account, which is an economic driver of this conflict, which is that because of the lack of resources for rapid support fighters is leading them to impose illegal fees, if you wish, or ransoming traffic of movement of trade from rapid support forces areas into Sudan Armed Forces areas. So they set up what we call, the toll gates, bawabat, every 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, and you have to pay as a truck driver, a bus driver. For a bus driver, it's for every single, passenger. For a truck driver, they have to pay cash or in kind, a percentage of the goods that they are carrying. This tells you that the currents of the economic exchanges between the areas held by the rapid support forces and the Sudan Armed Forces has been ongoing uninterrupted, despite all the insecurity and all the violence that is destroying the country. Because the two sides, the rapid support forces and the army, are gaining some revenue from the movement of trade. So, for instance, the livestock, all the oil seeds that are produced in Western Sudan continue to find their way to the areas held by the Sudan Armed Forces in Eastern Sudan, Central and Northern Sudan, where the authorities in Port Sudan export this produce and gain some revenue. And the rapid support forces, for their part, are collecting all these illegal taxes and sometimes in kind to supply themselves with consumer goods or with sheep even for their feeding and so on. The war is now moving to a very dangerous stage because it is very much fueled by hate language, by propaganda of a very ugly nature on social media, where we find people who are active on behalf of the rapid support forces and on behalf of the Islamist movement and the Sudan Armed Forces, calling on populations to turn against the others as people So people of Western Sudan are depicted in this hate language as the ones who are trying to take our land, who are trying to settle their cousins from the Sahel, from Chad and Niger in Sudan, and so on, and that they are good only to massacre and rape our women and so on. And the Rapid Support Forces media, social media activists are depicting the entire population in Rapid Support Forces in the Sudan Armed Forces areas as an abusive ruling elite that has subjugated, that has subjugated their areas to exploitation over the years. We have had multiple mediation attempts. Unfortunately, they have not been, very successful to date. But not to abuse my time,
Mediation comes afterwards.
Yes.
Outside actors.
Yeah. So we can discuss this, later on. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I think one important point is also to which outside actors are behind the warring parties.
We have been warning from the very beginning of this war that the longer it will take, that will open the door for foreign interventions in the conflict. But it has been the case also that the United Arab Emirates, from day one of this war, has stepped in and supported the Rapid Support Forces by supplying weapons, by supplying evacuation of wounded soldiers, and other supplies of nature to sustain their military effort against the Sudan Armed Forces. The United Arab Emirates is basically motivated by its animosity for the Brotherhood movement in Sudan, but also they are claiming that they are intervening in the conflict to protect their huge investments in land grabs in Sudan. That they have, under the regime of Bashir, invested in huge projects for animal feed, for the food security of the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia has actually done the same. But Saudi Arabia has been careful not to support one party against the other, and rather has been part of the mediation effort, which we can discuss. So, because of the prolongation of the war, gradually we have seen a return of Iran to Sudan, re-establishing diplomatic relationships, providing weapons to the Sudan Armed Forces, and this has also been the case of Russia. Russia, was present under Bashir in Sudan in two capacities. Wagner Group as a private security company, providing security service both to the Sudan Armed Forces and to the Rapid Support Forces, and paying itself by involvement in the extraction and trade of gold in Sudan. So this was the role of Wagner. The demise of Prigozhin after the failed attempt of coup d'etat against Putin did not change the situation. The Wagner Group has been transformed into the Africa Corps, wherever it is present in the Sahel region or in North Africa and Syria. It is more controlled by the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Internal Security in Russia, and it continues to do business under that capacity with the Rapid Support Forces at the beginning of the war. But now Russia is totally, aligned with the Sudan Armed Forces. And of course, Egypt is interested in seeing that the Sudanese army comes, as prevailing in this conflict, because they do have trust in the army as the national institution, and they don't want to see it, being on the losing side. However, a major motivation for Egyptian support for the Sudan Armed Forces are the economic exchanges between companies of the Sudan Armed Forces and companies that are controlled and run by the Egyptian army. And as we know well, Sudan Armed Forces companies export livestock, export all kinds of traditional agricultural products, which are raw materials to Egypt, where they are processed for local markets and for exports as products from Egypt. So they want to maintain that subservient relationship with the Sudan Armed Forces at the economic level. This is the main motivation. I think that, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps you could let us know at which stage, so what was the impact actually on Sudan and on the country itself? I think we have a map here on the de facto partition of the country and on the division of the country that rapidly, so both parties control parts of the countries and the country is de facto divided.
Well, we do have, a situation of a de facto territorial division of Sudan on the ground, with all of Western Sudan, with the except of Al-Fashir, the capital of North Darfur, large swaths of Kordofan. So the 4 states of Darfur, and large areas of Kordofan, Jazeera state, and the capital in the hands of the rapid support forces. And on the other side, we find that the Sudan Armed Forces is in control of, River Nile, Northern State, and the 3 states of Eastern Sudan, Kassala, Gaddarif, and the Red Sea. Parts of the Central Sudan, Sinnar State is disputed, and Blue Nile is still in the hands of the government. I do expect that there will be a serious escalation in the fighting in the coming period. This is the trend that we have seen happening with the resumption of fighting in Jabal Moya area, and now what's happening in eastern Jazeera with the defection of the commander of the rapid support forces of this area to the army. And what has happened, of course, this week, was the major backlash from the rapid support forces against civilians in the hometown of this commander, which is Tambul, and all the villages of eastern and towns of eastern Jazeera continue to suffer collective punishment by the rapid support forces because of this development. So the areas of control are demarcated, but the new phases of fighting is leading to very serious consequences on civilians, mass killings, mass displacements, forced displacement. This week, as we speak, this is happening as we are speaking now. And this is just a continuation of the nature of this conflict. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we retain is the toll on civilian and that the looting, which is a kind of way of paying the forces, and the main objective also of the forces. And maybe you could give us a hint what's happening precisely in Darfur, because we heard also on the very tragic situation in Darfur.
Again, I'm not very optimistic because I am aware that there are groups from which the rapid support forces traditionally recruits that are not happy with how the war has evolved over time, and there are now initiatives, they call them ethnic coordination initiative, in different ethnic groups, such as the Bani Halba, the Habbaniya, even among the Rizigat, to raise militias to oppose the rapid support forces from within the constituencies that are fighting for the rapid support forces. So this is going to be a very serious development because it serves the purpose of the military intelligence that has been supporting this tendency among protesting groups of Arab origin in different states of Darfur, offering them training and resources to set themselves up and then turn against their brethren who are fighting on the side of the rapid support forces. Mm-hmm. This means that the conflict will be pushed into Darfur, into Western Sudan. And as long as the areas under the control of the Sudan Armed Forces are stable, with because the rapid support forces will be consumed by this internal intercommunal, fights. As long as these areas will be, stable under the Sudan Armed Forces, they can allow Western Sudan to basically waste away into internal infightings among its different ethnic groups. Mm-hmm. And this is a major trend that I see happening, which is very preoccupying, and it means more years of ugly, interethnic, intercommunal fighting and ethnic fighting as well, and that is not something to and therefore there is real urgency for diplomatic solutions to be revamped, to be revitalized, so that some leverage is developed to bring these two parties to a table and to get them to agree to a ceasefire.
Thank you very much, Suliman. So for this overview of how this war is going on. So Amira, could you please, Sudan has been known for his strong civil society, which is absolutely exceptionally known in an African country. So it's a well-organized civil society, in particular women were at the forefront of the Sudanese revolution in 2018. So what has been the role of civil society since the outbreak of war? So is it possible to work, how they are working? So what are they doing, what role for women also now?
Okay, thank you. As Dr. Suliman has just explained, there is a humanitarian disaster in Sudan. Civil society organizations, including women, they have stepped in to fill the gap and to help people. And as we know, civil society can be seen as the power of the powerless. As you just said, Sudan has got a strong history of civil society. In fact, they have overthrown dictatorship in 1964, 1985, and in 2019. Now they are working towards peace. Women civil society organizations, youth organizations, resistance committee organizations, all grassroots organizations there in Sudan, they are working for peace. I'm going just to highlight some kind of their activities. I've got 10 minutes, but I will just try to highlight some. First of all, the most important things, they are campaigning against the war. They are relying on social media. Of course, there is no that kind of protest we have seen during the revolution because of security. But there are some kind of sporadic protest here and there in some cities, in Al Jazeera, for example, and Al Gadarif. So they are trying to do their best to campaign against the war. They are also involving in monitoring the humanitarian situation and trying to do some kind of humanitarian work. And of course, their work is very crucial because they are doing humanitarian work. They are also monitoring the humanitarian situation in their area. This is very important in the absence of the collapse of state, absence of state institution, the police, the civil defense. So civil society are trying to help people. And of course, they know their area. They know the local area. That's why they are trying to help people. They mapping safe locations and share information with the local people, because both of the warring parties, they are not interested in the civilian. They don't tell the civilian what's going on. They don't tell them which area is safe, so people can leave their homes and seek safety somewhere. Civil society organization were there, they will tell people, if you want to go to Egypt, take that X route, don't to go to reach Alpha, don't go via Omdurman because there is bombardment there, there's fighting there. So they share this information with people, which is very crucial. And of course, knowledge is power. Without knowledge, people can't do anything. They also help in the evacuation of international staff. That is particularly when the war started, I think, in May and June, they help with the minimum resource they have got to help international staff to get out of Sudan. They formed mutual aid groups known as Emergency Response Room, where they try to provide food and some kind of medications to people in their area. And in fact, they are seen as the front-line humanitarian aid workers. This is a very important point. I'm going to talk it again. They also helping displaced people, providing meal, medicine in their displacement camps in Darfur, for example, in Al Jazeera. They try to do some kind of psychological support to children, to women. They provide some kind of safe spaces for women. Now, I'm going to mention examples of resistance committees because I think it is very important to name these organizations. They are working there, but their work is invisible. We want the international community to know about them. One example is Shambat al-Aradi resistance committees. They mentioned the shortage of food and medicines and the spread of infectious diseases, particularly during the rainy season, and called on the international organization for humanitarian aid. They said, look, we need medicines and we need flour. They want flour for people so they can bake, they can make food, and that can. This is a specific demand from a specific resistance committee. There is also emergency room in Baba Nusa in Kordofan. There was this committee, they were able to obtain funding from Norwegian Refugee Council to provide meals through the called communal kitchen or a Tukul central kitchen. Here, this is a small organization, but they managed somehow to get funds from international organization. A question may be asked there, can international organizations try to do some kind of partnership with local organizations, give them aid, and those people, because they know the area, they know the need of their people, they can administer the aid. I mean, this is a question maybe we can all think about it. Now, challenges. You ask about challenges?
Yeah, about challenges. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, people are there working, as I said, with limited resources, but there are some kind of challenges. First of all, insecurity, because both of the warring parties are targeting civil society activists, those who are working on the ground, including women and youth. The militia and the army, both of them are targeting them. Women were abused and harassed, and in fact, there is some cases of raping of women who were working in emergency room. An example in Bahri, that's some kind of a challenge, very serious one. Lack of resources. People need money, they need materials, of course. They don't have enough resources to do their job. Internet blackout. If there is no internet, it's very difficult for people, to communicate and to send the messages they want to send to people. And of course, internet blackout, it contributes to the invisibility of the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. The international community will not know about it if there is no internet, because we don't have international media there. Right, so despite that, I believe people are there, the brave people are there, civil society are there, and they are trying to do their job. Now, I move to the impact of Islamization.
Yeah, that's a question which but let's go before. So if civil society has somehow replaced social services of the state, in the breakdown of the state, civil society has taken over. So what is the role of the diaspora in there? So how can the diaspora support these people inside? How you transfer money, for example? How is this working?
Right. Sudanese diaspora, they are all over the world, between 4.5 to 5 million people. They responded rapidly to the crisis in Sudan. They were engaged in fundraising activities, different activities. They raised money and sent to people in Sudan. They also lobbied the international community and to tell people about what's going on in Sudan. And they saw the solidarity of peace activists all over the world. And I think this event is an example of solidarity with people in Sudan. They organized peaceful protests against the war in Sudan, meeting policymakers and speaking to the media, explaining the situation on the ground, including the humanitarian crisis. Political parties, groups organized political talks and debates and rallies in different cities, London, Vienna, Frankfurt, and so on. Human rights defenders organized talk highlighting the human rights situation in Sudan, abuses of women. Women's organizations, they talk about what's going on in Sudan, how women were harassed, were abused, were killed, and that kind of stuff. And singers, actors, they also participated in fundraising events. Students, young people, they have came up with innovative means to support people of Sudan. And in fact, they managed to change that kind of perception. We think young people, they don't care about what's going on in Sudan. They are not involved in politics. They have changed that, and they have shown they are capable of helping people in Sudan, and they understand what's going on in Sudan. That's mainly yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for that explanation of how people join up and what civil society is doing. So you have told us before also something, that with the ongoing war, there has been, the Islamist movement has been raising, and there is Islamism is on the forefront. So how does this affect also hate speech? How does this affect also women and the work of civil society?
Of course, yeah. The war has created a strong foundation for ISIS, Islamic States of Iraq and Syria, or the Islamic States. They are there. They practice what they believe, and we have seen a beheading of people on the internet. They did behead people, and they call for killing of the opponent. They think if you are against the war, you should be killed. So that kind of practice are there in Sudan. It used to be there, but the war helped it to flourish. There is also insecurity by Islamists. I mean, they threat people, and they have started to grow, as I just mentioned. There is also some kind of violation of law, violation of laws of war. And they try to defend that, because this is war. In war, everything can happen, bad things can happen. And the war itself, based on the Islamization of the war itself, it perpetuates gender inequality and set back women's, or gains women have. The gains of women, now they are not at the forefront as it used to be. Racist practice have become widespread. A person can be arrested because of their color, because of dialectic, because the way what people are wearing. That kind of stuff became widespread, as just Dr. Baldo mentioned. That kind of racist is flourishing during the war, and it's backed by Islamist thought and practices. Those are the main things.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Amira. You want to add something?
No, I agree entirely on all the different aspects of the involvement of civil society groups and what they are doing. The fact of the matter, the health system in Sudan, the hospitals and the primary health system have all but collapsed entirely. And it is through this kind of self-help systems that people are providing not only, these community kitchens for helping people have access to food, but also primary healthcare centers and, servicing a hospital that remain functioning. There are a lot of volunteers who go there to drive ambulances or to help with the cores that are needed in this hospital. So these are ongoing activities, and the civil society volunteers who do this in emergency response rooms should really be recognized as humanitarian workers, and there should be a demand for their protection as, under, international law. Humanitarian workers are protected, so should be the volunteers from the emergency response rooms and civil society organizations.
Thank you very much. So we have talked before about the ethnicization of the conflict, so the difficulties that suddenly from a conflict which was seemingly between two generals, it has split up and it has become mainly an conflict also along ethnic lines in a country which has been a very multi-ethnic country. And and the dangerous issues on how to control that. So, and one element leading to that has been the hate speech and has been the rising Islamism and rising hate speech, in particular through social media, that you have to say. So, Osama, I understand that you are very active in following also social media in Sudan. How have you observed this trend? How does it express itself, and how do you find that? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you, of course, for this chance, for this opportunity, and of course, Dr. Ishraga, which we call in Arabic Auntie Khalti. What should I say? I mean, it's very devastating. It's a very multi-layered and multifaceted conflict, as Mrs. Irene at first mentioned. Yes, I mainly do, for example, I mainly do educational work through various media outlets. We have a radio show, for example, which is broadcasted once a month, which was initiated by the Association of Mendi. I endeavor to educate through social media. But to be honest, the world of social media pretty much resembles the real world. In terms of the Sudanese diaspora, there are various social media channels who are broadcasting a very detailed picture of the conflict. Yes, those channels are mainly produced by young Sudanese people, like Mrs. Khalti Amira said, who also played a big part in the last Sudanese revolution of 2019. Additionally to the women, of course. So Sudanese women and Sudanese youth carried the revolution. But to be quite frank, this is not a new phenomenon because all of the revolutions in the Sudan were carried mainly by those two civilian parts of the country. And to be quite frank, unfortunately, there's little to no effort of covering the miseries of the Sudan by official big media outlets. And I quite agree, of course, with Suliman, with Mr. Suliman about with a lot of things, but I have some different viewpoints for some points, but I guess we will get to that later. Like I said, there seems to be no interest, of course, in terms of the Sudan, because I think at the end it is still a reflection of anti-black racism, and I think anti-Muslim racism as well, because the Sudan covers both dimensions. And to be frank, the last regime, of course, did its efforts as well to close up and cover the Sudan from the outside through its Islamistic policies. It is really upsetting that a lot of people don't even know that the Sudan exists, which was the largest country in Africa before the separation of 2011. And if someone knows about the Sudan, they only associate it either with crises or wars. It's true. I think the faith of the Sudan was never, since its independence, it was never to have a dignified life, because it still suffers from the effects of colonialism. I mean, Sudan had, with its independence, it had like 22 different political parties. And I think, for example, I'm not quite agreeing that it is only the military who are carrying revolutions or coups. I think there are, behind the military, there are political powers, political interests, political parties who are trying to separate members into the military and to overthrow the actual regime. So we have to be frank and ask this question of the role of the EU as well, because the EU didn't put much effort to establish a functioning system there. At the contrary, it did quite the opposite. As we had a lunch today, and I mentioned to Ms. Irene as well that, for example, it wasn't mentioned now as well that the EU has connections as well with the RSF since its migration policies, because the RSF was basically responsible for the security of the borders, and the EU had some, like since 10 years ago, various connections with the RSF. Yeah, I think with its historical responsibility, the EU looked only after its interests and not after the prosperity of the nation. So, like at the beginning, at the introduction, it was mentioned, Sudan, the locality of the Sudan is very of geopolitical interest because it's close to the Red Sea. Example for example, for the Bab el-Mandab, or in the northern borders for the Suez Canal, it is a historical important of a strategic point for the EU as well. So we might argue this would be in the hands of its own. Yeah. Okay. So yes, to go back to your question, the Sudanese diaspora, who are mainly scattered in different Arab countries, such as the Arab Gulf countries or the UK or the US, very much putting a big effort into giving us information about the Sudan. But it's a very difficult issue because both players, the Sudanese army and the RSF, are cutting off the internet sometimes to isolate the country. So even if the diaspora is trying to stay connected with people there, it's quite difficult to get access to solid information there. Yeah, and I can name, of course, some media outlets. Yeah, I think it still needs more effort to connect the various players in order to fight for a common goal, which is peace for the Sudan. This would require consciousness, not for different policies or ideologies, because to be frank, I have the observation that Sudanese people are very passionate about political ideologies. If they're convinced of an ideology, but in order to stop this war, it really starts with this basic thing to end this war, because of course it is much more difficult to establish peace, I guess, than to have war. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Osama. So we will just, you mentioned something, you mentioned the trend of peace. So I will just ask Suliman, there have been since the beginning of the war, and this war is not old, it's only 18 months that it's ongoing. So the toll is already extremely high. And there have been, since month one, there have been mediation efforts from the outside. Yeah. So maybe before we call on our colleague in Brussels, so maybe you just give a short overview, what mediation efforts have there been, and how far have they gone? Shortly.
Well, let me start by saying, war starts in April 2023. In May, which is a few weeks in the war, the Jeddah platform was launched by the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And it was conceived as an emergency diplomatic intervention to get the two parties to agree to a humanitarian cessation of hostilities. The mediation achieved the signing in that month of May of a declaration of principles, not an agreement, of commitment to the essential tenets of the international humanitarian law by the two parties. But since then, there have been no progress to date at the Jeddah talks. However, I want to remind people that before May 2023, there were several ceasefires for more than a dozen ceasefires. to allow the evacuation of foreign nationals from Sudan. And hundreds of thousands of foreign nationals were evacuated safely from the country, with the rapid support forces and the army cooperating with that huge operation of evacuation of foreign nationals. What were the leverage and the means of pressure that were put on the parties to agree on this succession of ceasefires so that foreign nationals can leave the country? And let us ask ourselves, why aren't these same methods of pressure and leverage not used now to force them to evacuate the Sudanese population who are facing all this death and destruction and forced displacement and famine? This is the big question, which is the deficit of political will in the international community collectively to exert maximum pressure, force the hands of the army and the rapid support forces to agree to a ceasefire, just as they have done to allow the evacuation of foreign nationals. And this is what we should be pushing for. You know, that kind of coercion, coercive diplomatic measures and threats that, you know, they must have used very powerful tools to get them to agree to more than a dozen ceasefire. So since then, there haven't been a ceasefire. And because of the failure of, the Jeddah process, it was limited to, as I said, to the US and to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Everyone else, you know, in the mediators, the African Union, the sub-regional, interregional governmental authority for development, the IGAD, the European Union, everyone felt kept out of the inner circle of what's happening in Jeddah. And this created a lot of frustration and a feeling of that the US is trying to drive this process and get the Saudi Arabia influence on the army so that they come to the table and agree to a ceasefire. So in the end, a multiplicity of processes. Bahrain was again an interesting, it's a reiteration of Jeddah, but driven by intelligence agencies in the United States, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, in Bahrain, that forced the army and the rapid support forces to send the second in command to Bahrain, to Manama, for a negotiation to end the conflict, not just for a humanitarian ceasefire. And there was progress, traction that was obtained by the second in command, General Kabashi, who went there and met with Abdul Rahim Dagalu. But then this was totally derailed when Kabashi returned to Sudan and the document was leaked and there were attacks from those supporting the war to continue, mainly the former ruling party, National Congress Party, and the Islamist movement, for the army not to go alongside, to carry this process to the end of the ceasefire. We ended up in the latest now active mediation of the Geneva process, which is an attempt again by the US and the Swiss government with the association of several of the previous mediators as facilitators, including the EU and the African Union and so on. But I think we need to rethink different approaches so as the parties are really coerced into agreeing to a ceasefire and to peace. I don't see them coming on their own will to get to that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and thank you. And this morning you also mentioned the civil society as a new mediator also,
Yeah.
or as a figure which is coming out, Sudanese civil society, which suddenly comes into the process and playing also a role of mediation between the two warring parties. This
is a dimension which is not very much highlighted actually in the current conflict. I want to give just two very quick examples. In Al-Fashir, between the beginning of the war and until October of 2023, there was a relative calm and tranquility there because a local committee of the dignitaries, of the traditional leaders in the city, the tribal leaders, lawyers, academics, civil society leaders, negotiated a truce between the Rapid Support Forces units in Al-Fashir and the Sudan Armed Forces to protect civilians. And that truce held for 6 months. An implementing partner of this committee of mediation were the Darfur movements who were signatory to the peace process and were in al-Fashir neutral. They opted at the beginning of the conflict not to join the army or the rapid support forces. So they were the ones who were going between the army and the rapid support forces because military can talk to each other better. And they were helping with the security of the relief supplies to al-Fashir and from it for the rest of Darfur. They did a great job. The day the movements ended their neutrality and sided with the army in the fight against the rapid support forces, this local truce collapsed. And therefore, there are a lot of lessons to learn from that. You need to rely on local wisdom and expertise of these traditional leaders and to bring them into the mediation effort. Another phenomena happened in Cairo when the Egyptian government invited the Taqaddum alliance of forces which are pushing for a return to the democratic transition and end to the war, and between a dissident group from that coalition, which is the Forces of Freedom and Change Democratic Bloc. When the two parties failed to talk to each other in the conference room, they were brought together. There was a group of 5-6 facilitators, Sudanese influencers, personalities, many of them known to everyone as household names, Shafiq Kheir, Mahbub Abdel Salam, Dr. Nuruddin Sati, and Alim Abbas, the writer. They were doing shuttle diplomacy between the Democratic Bloc, the dissident group, and Taqaddum, so that they can agree on some common ground and have one voice for the civilians in this search for peace. Until now, this unification of common objective has not occurred, but I know that these efforts are continuing, and the group of agreed mediators between Taqaddum and the Democratic Bloc are working quietly behind the scene to continue this effort and realize that the civilians have a voice in the peace process. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it's time. We have talked a lot about outside actors and outside mediation. Yeah. So it's time also to call on the EU. So can we switch on to Daniel? So, and sorry to have you waiting so long. So, Daniel, from the outside, and it has been said here, we do not see the EU as an actor in these ceasefire or mediation initiatives. So why is this so? So what is the political approach of the EU to this crisis? So what can the EU do to pressure the warring parties, or their allies, and with which of the actors is the EU in contact? So what is the diplomatic approach of the EU in that crisis?
Okay, thank you very much, Irene, and good evening to everyone. Apologies that I couldn't go in person. So I think let's start with a few things that, of course, we have a very difficult task of balancing between our interest and between our values. What is for sure that one of the most important values, of course, is human rights for the European Union. But at the same time, we have to look at also our interest. I think it has been said many times that the Red Sea is very important. Now, of course, the Houthis are blocking it. But Sudan and the other littoral countries are critical for trade towards the European Union. And overall, the stability of the Horn of Africa is also critical for us. Of course, Sudan is not the only country in the Horn. We are looking at quite worryingly at Somalia and Ethiopia. If you're following regional developments, then you understand there is quite a lot of tensions. And of course, there are many Europeans, mostly the right-wing parties, they are afraid of migration. I think Sudanese are not high from among the so-called migrants. I don't like to use this word. I prefer the refugees. But some sometimes, of course, these terms can be mixed up. So they are not yet high, but if this war continues, you just have to look at the map, and they go through Libya, and they are already at the shores of the European Union. At the same time, Osama, I would like to correct one thing here, and then we can talk even bilaterally. We have never supported the RSF. So we did a very serious investigation, and I know that the internet is full of articles when they say that we supported the RSF, but not one penny has gone to the RSF. And this is, I hope it's rather misinformation. So an information which is not true, but it was not intentionally put. But I can even imagine in today's world that this is disinformation, that somebody is putting it on us, that we have supported the RSF. And then also a quite interesting point, Suliman, from you, when you asked why we, and when I say we, it's rather the international community, don't put a lot of pressure on the belligerents, or don't put the same amount of pressure on the belligerents which we have put during the evacuation. As far, I don't have access to that kind of information, but as far as I can deduct, the Sudanese, both sides were threatened by armed force. So if they were not stopping the fighting, they would have been bombed. And you know, if the Americans come in and some European member states, they would have done anything for their citizens. And I think both sides understood this, and that's why there was, I don't remember exactly, 3 days truce where the foreigners were evacuated. And again, we come to the interest and to the values. The interest of these countries was to evacuate their own citizens. This is also an obligation. But they are obviously currently not threatening the two belligerents with armed force. Unfortunately, there's enough troubles a little bit north to the Red Sea, and then next to Europe in Ukraine. Going back to the question, Irene, so the support, I just want to run back a little bit. You mentioned the Bashir 30 years. We were there with the Sudanese people during the Bashir years. Especially, we have a close connection with the armed opposition movement. So as of today, when we have meetings with Minni, for example, he always refers to the long-term support what he has gotten from the European Union. But we never have dealt with the Bashir government or governments and the NCP. So that meant that we always delivered the help through UN agencies and NGOs. Then came 2019, and we tried to put together, Suliman, I think you remember, the Sudan Family Support Program. Yeah. And here I can take the criticism that we were very slow. There was, I think, $1.5 billion or euros promised, and the delivery was very, very slow. And by the time we started to deliver, the coup d'etat happened in 2021. What we are doing now, from the humanitarian front, there was a conference in Paris, 15th of April, on a set date. And I hope that we don't have to do another conference in 2025, 15th of April. But if we have to, we will do. And there the EU pledged about over 300 million euros. The delivery, of course, is very difficult. We all know the problems of access. From Adres, from Chad, and then also from Port Sudan, which is full of administrative problems. I myself am trying to get a visa to go to Port Sudan, but this is proving quite difficult. So what we can do, why we are not, Irene asked why we are not at the table. I think my short answer would be, let's not imagine too much sometimes of the EU. We are not a country. We don't have a military force. So overall, I think we don't have that much leverage as the European Union, possibly more if we work together with the member states. And yes, we try to be observers, both in Jeddah and Geneva, but at the end of the day, it didn't happen. What we are trying to do is some confidence building measures, particularly on protecting infrastructure. which both sides are using. So that means both sides would have an interest, and you can think of, for example, dams, which are going to both parts of Sudan. And the EUSR, as you mentioned, Annette Weber is engaging with both parties. I also have sometimes calls with either side. Let's see how this develops. I hope in a few weeks, months, you will see some results. And then we'll try to find further common ground just for the ceasefire. Of course, the ceasefire doesn't mean that humanitarian aid shouldn't go in. We all know well that this is not a precondition for humanitarian aid, but currently it's very, very, very difficult to deliver this over 300 million euros of humanitarian aid. Then what we do, and I think it's very, very important, is documenting human rights violations. I'm not shying away, calling what happened in last June in West Darfur a genocide, another genocide. There are some member states which call it a genocide, others call it ethnic cleansing. This is we're talking about against the Masalit. And what we are doing through our network is collecting information, because we hope rather in the not so distant future, there will be a court case in The Hague. We have, of course, the 5 indicted, most of them in Sudan, possibly one of them in Libya. So we're working closely with the ICC, and we are also working with the UN Organization for Human Rights, that's the OHCHR. So this is very important, and today everything is, not everything, but a lot of the things is digital. So this is something you can spot on videos, you can spot on audio material, and with putting it aside, documenting it for a further possible trial. Then we are supporting the emergency response rooms. Their maiden name was the resistance committees. This is quite an innovative approach from the European Union, because normally, Irene, we cannot directly give cash to these local organizations. So we do this through international NGOs, but they are receiving the cash. And I always said that basically they are the government in Sudan. They are going to be the backbone of the future government in Sudan. They are the ones who are delivering services, as Amira has also mentioned. And the last one, which we are trying to do, and we are failing for the moment, as you have seen Guterres' response a few days ago, that we are thinking of boots on the ground. We are lobbying for boots on the ground. UNAMID was not a perfect experiment, very expensive, but it did deliver some results. And let's see, currently the UN Security Council setup is not really conducive for approval for boots on the ground. And of course, there would be the question of financing. But we analyzed that to have correct protection of civilians, which has a chance, obviously neither of the belligerent parties care about international humanitarian law and protection of civilians. It has to be an outside army. It's not realistic, I have to admit this, but if we brush it off, we auto-censor, we censor ourselves and we brush it off the table right now, then it's definitely not going to happen. So we try to keep it on the table. There will be a new president in the United States. There is a new leadership also in Europe and possibly in other countries. So let's see how far we can go with this. And one more thing, and then I will finish, that a couple of the speakers have mentioned that this is a forgotten crisis. And I like to correct these people. These colleagues. This is not a forgotten crisis. This is an ignored crisis. Because forgotten, no, if you go on The Guardian, the BBC, or even CNN, there is information about the crisis in Sudan. It is just ignored. And then I would, except for, let's say, the humanitarian part, and then I would have to go back to what I started, that unfortunately many times it comes down to interest. and rather than values when it's about the war in Sudan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So,
I need a minute. Sorry, I need a minute.
you need a minute.
Yes. Oh, 2
So,
minutes.
because I wanted to give the questions the floor,
That's
but
fine.
go ahead. No.
Yeah,
No,
just
no.
one thing about civil society and being part of any talk, whether in Jeddah or Egypt or in Europe. Civil society group there, we have got very strong women civil society group. Taqaddum doesn't represent civil society in Sudan, but because they are mobile, they can go and attend meetings. We find them in every single talk. Civil society in Sudan, they are the one, they should be part of any talk, any diplomatic talk, or if they should be part of it. We have to find them, because those are the people who are holding things together. Those are the people who are helping people of Sudan. So they have to be part of any talk, not to ignore them. Otherwise, we will repeat the same cycle as before. Just one more thing to mention.
One sentence.
Yes, it related to immunity or bringing war criminal to justice. We had war in southern Sudan ages ago. We had the same scenario, displacement, killing of people, gender-based violence. There is no justice for victims. The same scenario happened in Darfur since 2003. Same scenario, displacement, hundreds of people died. No justice for people. This time, there must be justice for victims of the war. Those war criminals, they should be taken to trial, ICC or whatever. That's very important. Otherwise, if this war is finished today, we are going to have another war in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very good statement. So I will repress you for the moment. You will have a moment at the end, because I want to hand over the questions to the floor.